Here on YouTube, upgrading to full frame is often considered the ultimate goal for every photographer. And the narrative kind of goes like this. You first start with a basic APS-C camera and an 18 to 55mm kit lens. Then at some point you upgrade your kit lens to a prime lens and you're wowed by the results. But then at some point you're ready for the big move to full frame. And apparently that's what real photographers use, right? But is full frame really the game changer that it's made out to be? Well, in today's video, I want to share with you my full frame experience. So let's get into it. First of all, there is a certain upgrade path that is commonly promoted. And often this path of image quality getting better as you upgrade your gear is said to be linear and proportional and steady across a line as you upgrade your gear, but the reality is arguably a bit more nuanced. The first step in every photographer's journey is to move from a phone to a digital camera. And this step is huge because you have so much more detail in your file, the color is perceived as better, you can also create a specific degree of background blur that simply wasn't possible on a phone. Then the next step on the journey is that people usually dump their kit lens and they go for their first prime lens. And usually prime lenses are brighter, so they perform better in low light. So instead of shooting at ISO 12800, you now shoot at 1600, which is a massive improvement. Additionally, you can finally separate your subject so much better. And generally speaking, sharpness is also quite a step up from the general kit lens. And then at some point you have amassed a set of different lenses, primes, bright zooms, maybe also a second camera body, and you think that you're finally ready for the great step. I'm talking about the upgrade from your current setup to a full frame camera to make you an allegedly real photographer. And as you want to upgrade to full frame, you watch all these tutorials and everybody on YouTube just yapping about full frame and how great it is and why you need that camera. And after binge watching all these videos and consuming so much information on the internet, I finally took the plunge and I upgraded to a full frame camera, a Sony a7 IV and a 2470 f2.8. And soon I realized that the upgrade that I perceived to be so straightforward turned out to actually not be as straightforward as I expected it to be. So when I unboxed my Sony a7 IV and my 2470 f2.8, I ran into a few unexpected issues. First of all, it was the weight, because that 2470 f2.8 was massive. And yes, I could have gone for, I don't know, a small 50mm lens or something that is a little bit less bright. But since I really wanted to take advantage of that bigger sensor and the fact that I could use f2.8 zooms and still shoot at night and having decent image quality, I decided to go for the best bread and butter lens in the Sony lineup. But since the f1.4 lens now covers a full frame circle and not an APS-C circle anymore, the entire optic needs to be bigger to also accommodate that bigger sensor. In other words, if you want better image quality, you really need to ask yourself whether you can handle the additional weight. The next unexpected issue was the feel, because coming from the Fuji platform, I missed the tactile dials, the dedicated buttons, and the intuitive layout of my Fujifilm cameras. And I wouldn't necessarily say that shooting on the Sony camera was a bad experience, but it wasn't necessarily a fun experience either. The next full frame disillusionment I had was related to image quality, because in the end I got the full frame setup mostly because I wanted to achieve higher image quality. So I put the Sony a7 IV to the test against this very cheap X-T30 and the 35mm prime lens that is currently attached to it. I quickly realized that sharpness with a margin of error was about the same between both setups. This is a 26 megapixel camera and the Sony a7 IV was a 33 megapixel camera, and both optics of both of these setups actually resolve the detail of their respective sensors relatively well, so that the resolution difference between both cameras wasn't actually significant at all. Additionally, I tested dynamic range, and this is usually where full frame cameras are said to perform better, and that was also true. So I basically took the same photo on both cameras and I underexposed them by like 4 stops, later brought up the shadows, and I realized that by zooming into my image like 200 to 300%, there was more noise on the Fuji APS-C camera than on the Sony camera, where the results were a bit cleaner. The next aspect of image quality that I tested was high ISO performance, where bigger sensors are said to perform much better than smaller APS-C sensors. So I put it to the test and I put both cameras to ISO 12800 and I pixel peeped. And unsurprisingly, the full frame sensor was doing a better job than my Fujifilm APS-C. So while the noise performance was better on the Sony, it wasn't as life-changing as I expected it to be, simply because I shot my Fujifilm cameras a lot at night before, and I realized that I rarely actually pushed that ISO beyond, let's say, ISO 6400, where the difference really becomes apparent. So while the advantage was there, it didn't really make a whole difference in practical use. And while it is not directly correlated with sensor size, we should also have a chat about autofocus performance, where the Sony really performed absolutely incredible, and both my X-T30 nor my even older X-T2 were really matched in that regard. But was the difference in autofocus performance really enough to justify switching fully to Sony? Probably not. And the more I shot with the Sony, the more I came to appreciate the compact form factor and the retro fun experience of shooting the Fujifilm cameras, and most of the time I picked my technologically inferior Fujifilm X-T2 over my A7 IV. And since every time I went out for a shoot, I had to choose between whether I would take my Fujifilm cameras or whether I would take my Sony A7 IV, and it would always just involve this additional step of me having to decide what camera to pick for a specific shoot, which just drained my energy and deviated resources away from actually taking photos, and I knew that I had to change something about my current setup. So basically I had to take the difficult decision between two completely separate paths. Either I would fully jump on board with Sony and get their entire lens lineup and just fully line with it while selling off all my Fujifilm gear. On the other hand, I could also sell off all my Sony gear and just fully jump on board with Fujifilm and get myself the best lenses for the money that I made by selling all the Sony gear. And honestly, I had a horrible time taking that decision between a camera that's capable and stylish or a camera that's more capable but less stylish. And in the end, the decision I took turned out to be the best gear decision I have probably ever made in my life. So eventually I sold off all the Sony gear and I fully went on board with Fujifilm, really reigniting the appreciation for that system and what it had to offer, especially in terms of style, motivation, and inspiration to actually go out and take photos that the Sony could never have given me. And ever since taking this decision, I honestly never looked back. And the experience that I have made actually made me reflect on whether gear matters, or to what extent gear matters, and for what reasons gear matters. So while I think that technical specs are important to the extent that the camera doesn't get into your way of taking the photo, I also think that equally as important is that the camera inspires you to go out and shoot. And while I'm not telling you that you need a Fujifilm camera to have an enjoyable experience, because I know many people who are perfectly happy and have fun shooting on Sony, Canon, or whatever platform they like, I'm telling you that you should not underestimate this factor of how enjoyable and how inspirational a camera is in your journey as a photographer. Because a camera that is really, really capable on the one hand, but uninspiring to use and really big on the other hand, and it's effectively just collecting dust on your shelf, isn't really worth it. And you need a camera that motivates you to go out and shoot, that motivates you to take photos, that just inspires you to get better at your craft. So should you ever be in the market for a new camera, always bear in the back of your head why you started photography in the first place, for the fun of it. And when you make a purchasing decision, always bear in mind that it's not only about the technical specs, because technology doesn't take photos. A camera that encourages you to go out and shoot takes photos and makes you grow as a photographer. What system do you shoot on and what do you love about it? Let me know in the comment section, and if you're interested in my two favorite lenses, feel free to check out this video up here where I tell you all about it. And with that being said, thank you so much for staying till the end, and I hopefully see you in next week's video. Bye.